NextGen TCG podcast. I don't know what episode it is currently, but all I know is that EVs, as always, are going to the moon. So welcome in. My name is Nick Tetradenja, your co-host, and as always, we have the other co-host, Zach Browning, Gem Pokemon. How's it going, Zach? How are you today? He looks like you're back home again.
Doing pretty good. I made it home finally, and so just trying to get settled in, do some laundry, just kind of sort some cards here and there, and then we'll be back on the road tomorrow. So the cycle never ends.
You had some really bad travel luck this past week, right? You got a flight delayed 8 times or something that.
So Dallas had a bunch of storms. It was like tornadoes, thunderstorms, floods, all this stuff.
I heard about those. I'm glad you're alive. Glad you're alive.
Thanks, so I had a lot of people that were messaging me like, "Oh, weather's crazy. Be safe." A lot of people are avoiding Dallas, and I had 8 canceled flights in a row, where it was like you're on a flight. They're like, "All right, we'll get you on in 2 hours from now." This and that. Then it gets delayed, and then it's like, "Oh, crew timed out," or "Oh, something's wrong with the plane," or "Oh, Dallas more thunderstorms." And so, essentially, what's also crazy is I checked the bag because it was a longer trip, and somehow my bag made it to Dallas, and so I didn't have any clothes except for the clothes I had on. So I was stuck in an airport for basically 2.5 days, and that really tests your patience. I'll tell you that.
Was it U.S. Air?
No, unfortunately, it was American. So,
okay. U.S. Air is the worst flight company I've ever dealt with my entire life. I straight up refuse to fly U.S. Air. It doesn't work out. Anytime I've tried them, there's always an issue. So.
I think they might have merged with American. That maybe that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, that maybe more sense. All right.
Yeah.
This was several years ago, so I don't know. Anyways, so this past week, just introduction stuff. I had a bunch of. Remember, I told you guys last week that I dropped off some cards at the Toronto Card Expo in person just because they offered 110% hammer price for cards dropped off that weekend. Those auctions finished on May 26th, and we're just gonna go very briefly through some of the highlights from the sales that I had. Overall, pretty happy with the things that how things turned up. The one that shocked me the most was the 2016 Battle Festa Pikachu. That's the one that has the reverse holofoil with the Mitsuru Arita signature in the bottom right hand corner. That finished off at 4,900 with buyer's premium, which I was thrilled about the price. I was expecting probably around 3,500 for that card. Also, it's kind of like a dual card. There's also a Mew as well. Let me just pull that up here. I have to click it because I need to. It only shows my payout price. The Mew finished off at 4,200, so pretty good. 2.8 certs. So I was kind of wondering if those older around the 2.8, 2.7 search would change the price of those cards, but ended up pretty well. As well, we also have another highlight was one that also really surprised me was a Neo Destiny First Edition Dark Espeon. An EV. I wasn't sure based on how WotC was going these days how those would finish. That finished at 4,300. Happy with that price. This one still hasn't been paid off yet, but I auctioned the final Lotozard that I was going to auction off. So that finished off at 3,200. So I've auctioned 2 of them, so I have 3 left now. So those will probably stay in the collection for a little bit longer. And then this last card I actually missed in my last submission. It's a Poncho Gyarados. This finished off at 2,300, 2.8 cert. And then we have a couple more EVs. Some Undaunted Prime Umbreons finishing off at just over 2,000. Then we also have a pair of Prime Espeons finishing off at around 1,600, 1,500. And then we also have a warm unique low Pikachu finishing off at 2,100. Older label, non-lighthouse. And the last one I'm going to mention is, I was a little bit disappointed this was probably the worst performing card that I anticipated. This was Neo Destiny First Edition Light Togetic finishing off at 1,400. I thought that card was sitting around probably around the $2,000 mark. But obviously I thought it underperformed, and a bunch of sub $500 cards from the rest going on there. So keeping in line with the title of this podcast, I auctioned off 6 EVs or evolutions, and they pretty much did as well as I expected. The Dark Espeon, like I said, it performed better than I expected, and the Prime Umbreons and Espeons, I paid like $200 each for those things. So for them finishing off at between 1,500 to 2,000, it's well above my at my preferred return of about 4 times investment of what I paid for these cards. So yeah, overall pretty happy with the service from PWCC and the payout. And yeah,
That's pretty awesome, dude. Congrats. Those are some big cards. So, question, was that your last copy of some of those cards, or do you have more stowed away?
the only so all the Poncho stuff I only had single copies of. And then I only had single copies of the Battle Festa Pika as well as the Mew. But all the other cards were extra copies. So there was just
Dark Espeon, like, oh my gosh, all these like low pop cards you're just sitting on.
Yeah, just that's how you make money, Zach. You gotta buy and sit.
Buy doubles.
We're buying doubles, and we sit on them. We're not flipping right away in like a couple months. You forget that you have them, and then one day you just recheck the prices. Like, holy moly, it's time to sell, and then and that's where we sit today.
Can I get another holy moly, please?
No. Oh, man. I almost feel like that holy moly might have like offended someone. So let's not do that again. So yeah, those were my PWC sales from May 26th.
That's amazing. So I guess going into it, you might have been a little skeptical. Like, you handed the cards off in person, you're a little bit of a rush, and then the cards got listed, and then they eventually go to auction. Like, how were you feeling like during that? Is this your first sort of like big release of this inventory you've had for a while?
No, I wouldn't say this. It's like probably my second release. It was like I said last week. It was far less stressful handing them off in person. At the same time, you really don't get a receipt from so when you go there, you literally hand them the cards. There's one sheet. They don't like write in like every card that you hand in. They just said how many cards you handed in and how much you want them insured for, and then they just go in the back. So I took a video of some of the heavy hitters that I also have a PWCC, just as video proof that they actually existed at some point. But it's very it's a very friendly hobby, and I remember I've told the story before. Like my first event when I met up with like the Toronto Pokemon group when they were still running from the people of E4. Charlie was at an event, and Marie Reina just straight up at that time Charlie was just taking like cards in to send to PSA as a intermediary, and like Reina just handed him like 2 Shadowless Charizards and just like no receipt, just full faith that no copies would get switched or anything. It's just like this hobby is, despite like all the inventory and the amount of money that happens behind the scenes, it's based on a lot of faith and a lot of trust. And we've said it so many times before, but like you're as good as you're in this hobby as your reputation is. So if you soil your reputation, then you're gonna have a hard time because everyone talks, everyone knows who you are, and if you screw one person over, you pretty much get blackballed by the entire community. So be a good person. Be honest.
I've known so many like really, really good people that have like made like a dumb mistake, like just like a dumb mistake, and then they have just literally left the hobby. Like I've not heard from them, not seen them. I got a text, Instagram deleted, made private, and there's probably like 4 or 5 like cases of like what most people consider to be pretty highly reputable that have just sort of disappeared, and a lot of it was just really, really dumb mistakes that were intentional. Like there's no ifs, ands, buts. It's just
stealing Charizards from a store, from a show.
I mean, on camera, it's it's so silly, but it doesn't mean people are. I mean, I don't know. If someone's caught stealing, I don't want them in my life at all. So
yeah,
that's an easy way to cut someone out completely.
All right. Let's move on to more positive stuff. Let's not dwell on the negative. Let's move into market trends. Because a lot of cool stuff, more high end. Dude, when does the high end flow end? Zach, when does the high end flow just stop coming? Is it really high
Yeah.
end if it just keeps coming out?
I don't know where these printers are, but they are working. I'll tell you that. No, I think there's a lot of high end that's come out recently, but I don't think it's going to be like this forever. I think there may have been a few small hordes of extra stuff that have sort of like released all at once, where people probably thought they had 10 grand worth of stuff. They find out they got $1 million. And they're like, "Give me that right now. I will take it and run." And so I do think the high end will slow down as far as availability, either later this year or next year. But it still doesn't change the fact that we've seen so many illustrators, so many Pika trophies, so many Charizards. I think one of the metrics to look at is like the Charizards. Like there aren't more getting graded, so it's just changing hands. Whereas the illustrators are like they seem to be more like fresh copies versus like the cycling of old copies.
All right, so Goldin had their auctions. First one we want to talk about is a complete set of SSB's best in Japan. These were the winner, where the winner's card actually has their faces on it, which I always find very awkward. You have a picture of a child on a trading card, which I do believe diminishes their value, even though they're just as rare as some of the older trophy cards. It's awkward, dude. Owning a card with someone's face on it, like unless it's
Ishihara?
unless it's an Ishihara GX, it's weird. It's weird. Anyways, so we had a complete set, ranging of varying grades all the way from PS. I think the lowest grade was the PSA 4 and the number 2, and the highest grade was the 8. Was either the number 1 or the 3. I can't remember. But the complete set sold together completely for 195K, and just given the overall rarity of those cards, I feel like that's a bit undervalued, in my personal opinion. Obviously, there is a very low grade of a PSA 4, so that's damaged pretty much at a PSA 4. But I just feel like just the historical value of those cards you should be expecting a little bit more out of them.
Yeah, well, a set of these sold, I think, a couple months ago, which was also an extra set, which is kind of nuts. The weird part about this, I think the big mistake that was made is putting them in a lot together. And so the amount of buyers at 200K is much lower than the amount of buyers at like 70K. And our hobby's getting to that point where, there used to be like not a lot of buyers at $500 for cards, and there used to be like, a small pool of buyers at 10K, and then all of a sudden the Charizard's 50, and now 50K is more accessible. But it's one of those things where as we kind of tear up in the hobby, like hopefully the first Zard's $1 million someday. But it's one of those things where by putting the cards together, you limit your buyer pool more. And 200K for a lot of Pokemon cards is a lot. Like that it's hard to swallow, even given the rarity, this and that. Like it almost needs to be like an S tier type card. And these are so close to like the top of the top. But there's a couple of things that are slightly better. And so getting an average of like, 65K a card, I think is pretty fair. Like you said, given the 4s in there. But I bet you that a couple of these would have hit 100 on their own had they split them up.
Which is a perfect segue into the next auction that Goldin had, which was a complete PSA 10 set of the first edition 16 holos, finishing off at 317K. I get the idea, and like that sellers have. Oh, let me just unload all these at once, just so I can get my money up front. But you really got to split them up if you want maximum value of what you're going to get for these cards. Just like you said, the amount of buyers, you just limit your buyer pool a lot, because let's just say like you and me are collectors. We haven't completed a first edition set yet. We have like 1 or 2 obscure cards left over. We have a Hitmonchan, or like we have a Chansey that we need to finish the 16 hull set. We're not going to be in this. We're not going to be in this because we don't want the other cards. We don't need another Charizard. We don't need another Machamp. And we don't need another Blastoise. And we don't want to pay for them. So you're really limiting your buyer pool when you have a whole lot together. And at 317K, I almost feel like that's just a person with a lot of money saying, this is like, I'm just going to hold the line here. This is like extremely good deal for all 16 holos, especially when you consider like Charizard at this moment sells for 175, at its height selling at 400K. 317 for all 16 hollows is just that is a steal. That is one of the biggest steals that I've seen in the last couple months.
It makes no sense, man. I mean, Chansey's like 30K on its own. There was an auction for Charizard at 295K. I think it was something like that on alt. And like the crazy part about that, like the auction was paid for, but at the same time, it took a second bidder to get there, and that second bidder is a legitimate bidder that I know. And so it's crazy to think that like a month or so ago, you literally could have been one card or it could have been the whole set. I mean, literally, this was a mixed set, and like you said, like there's certain people that love buying individual cards. Like I love Dragonair and stuff. Like I'd throw a bid on a Dragonair anytime it pops up. Last some of the item finders, some of the harder to get cards would certainly get bids that would drive it up. But when you get to this like level, it's someone just saying, "Man, this is a good deal." Like I bet you the buyer of this buys it, splits it up. Maybe they take a card they need for it, and maybe they just re-auction it because there's so much money left on the table here.
Don't sell as complete lots, people. Split it up. Be patient, and then you'll do better long term. And so we talked about illustrators. So there was a PSA 8 illustrator as well on Goldin, finishing off at 305K. I don't know what else can we say about illustrators at this point. Every single podcast we talk about an illustrator, so it's just I'll let you take the floor here.
Yeah, it's just they keep popping up. I do think these are new copies. I don't think they're the same ones being cycled. I only say that because I'm familiar with some of the buyers of some of the illustrators. And I do know that they're not reselling them. There's a lot of people that just want that one copy. And there's some people that say, man, this is a great card. It's a blue chip card. And, PWCC used to always talk about blue chip stuff here, there. And, like you want to buy this and that. And they just, over time, it'll appreciate. So I think you get people that are looking at some of the illustrators that are just kind of getting crushed in price. And I think that it's just eventually there's going to hold a line. So I personally think the floor for any illustrator right now is 150. I think if any copy, raw, beat up, authenticated, drawn on, like 150. There were two other sales. Rare Candy had the 8.5 that went for around like 200K. And then PWCC had a CGC 8. The Rare Candy was a CGC 8.5, but PWCC had a CGC 8 that went for like 200K. And so there does seem to be a line there. But, I mean, I would consider those to be near Met plus copies. So, like, copies in decent shape. There was some commentary that the PWCC copy may have had a little indent on the back. The Rare Candy one had a little bit of edge wear here, there, but overall looked pretty good. And then the PSA 8, that just seems to be a, PSA premium type thing. But, through experiences and through other people we've talked to, it does seem like maybe, I'm just throwing this out there, maybe some pop control around Illustrator, just around those higher grades. So, I do think there is some substance to saying getting a PSA 8 illustrator is probably harder than getting a CDC 8, just given experiences we've seen. So is it 100K more? It's tough to justify. But at the same time, like, that's a big jump for the same grade. And
at this point, I honestly think like the only thing that really intrigues me is when we get like into the the higher grades, like the mint copies. Like I'd be interested to see like in this market where a PSA 9 would fetch now in the current market, or a CGC 9. Anything below that, I feel like is almost like a crapshoot where we are in prices. So we'll see. We'll get one. Will hit what a PSA 9 will eventually roll off the printing press into a case soon. So we'll
500K, 500K.
We'll see how it goes. But let's move on to good cards. Let's move on to good cards. A CGC 9, number 2, 1997 Pika trophy. Beautiful card. Love the trophy Pikas. Finishing off at 219K. Man, we had a question about this earlier. At one point, that card, based on the centering alone, would not get a 9 in PSA. It would probably get an 8. So I just running the numbers in my head. What's the most grade optimization here? PSA 8 or CGC 9 trophy Pika? But I almost feel like 220 is a good price for some reason. I just feel like that's a solid sale. If you're the owner of that card, I think you should be happy. What do you think?
I think it's a solid sale. CDC 9 is the way to go here. You have to think, PSA is the 9 and the 10. CDC's got the 9, the 9.5, the 10, the pristine. But when you look at it at face value, PSA 9, CGC 9, they feel very similar to the outside eye. Like they feel very similar, but CGC has more layers above. So probably getting that CGC 9 with the centering, maybe it's like 8.5 centering or something, but everything else is good, is okay. And I think this card isn't it like pedigree to the actual winner? Like isn't it tied back to like the owner?
I am not 100% sure. It didn't list with the trophy case. I didn't look at its provenance based on its listing. I just saw file price. And you are right, because it was actually one of the older CGC labels that actually had the old subgrades. So it actually did have an 8.5 centering.
Oh, that makes sense. I was just taking a guess there.
Yeah, you're right on. You know what you're talking about when you're grading cards. Looking at face value.
If only we were that good. But no, there was a faded Pika trophy that sold for more that was pedigreed that went for higher premium. And I do think if you can say this copy is tied back to a winner, I think it should go for more, even if the copy like doesn't look as good. So in my opinion, all these extra copies were probably printed at the same time. Like I don't think there was another print run or years later this or that. Like I do think like of all the illustrators and all the extra Pikas and this and that, I do think that they probably came off the same time. And I think just people at Pokemon are probably like, oh, I want a copy. Oh, I want a copy. This, that. I mean, we've seen public images online of some of the artists having like an illustrator in their binder. I think we've seen 2 examples of that. And so, like, if it does tie back to the winner itself, like I find that to be more valuable because of the meaning of it, because the historical piece, like all that stuff tied to it. An extra copy is still pretty cool. I think it still has value. But I would rather buy a lower grade card that is the actual winners versus a extra and a high grade.
We talked about this last year. Like those extra trophy cards where like it's very obvious it's an extra copy because the winner's name is not printed on the card in the top left-hand corner. And for some reason, the market tells us that it doesn't matter in that case. Like those cards finished off pretty much in line of what the non-extra copies finished off at, with the ones that were actually awarded, which I wholeheartedly agreed with you with that sentiment of like I would prefer to own the actual copy that was handed out. I've used this analogy before. I don't know if it exactly fits, but what's worth more, Tom Brady's actual Super Bowl ring or an extra Super Bowl ring that was made for the team and just never awarded, right? It's actually the one that was given to Tom Brady. But yeah, anyways, so that's where we are. So that was Goldin auctions. A lot of bangers coming out of Goldin. Let's move into some PWCC auctions that ended up in the last couple of weeks. What's the Black Label Premium, Zach? What's the
too high?
To you, what is the Black Label Premium?
Take off a digit, like literally just cut a digit off the end, and then we'll be closer.
Apparently, it's around 4x because we have or 5x, anyways. We have a Black Label Luigi Pikachu finishing off at 30.6k. Mario Pikas are still hot. They're just still super hot right now. I have no idea how, because there are literally 1,000 PSA 10 copies out there, but apparently they are still because those Poncho or Mario Pikas usually finish off around $5,000 around that mark in a PSA 10 copy, and there are a lot of them out there. But we have a Black Label BGS coming out at 30.6. So you think that's too much? You think that premium is too much?
In what world does this make sense? This must be the ultimate Luigi fan that just wants this card and this and that. Because, like, does this card ever reach 50K? Does it ever reach higher? Like, I don't think so. I think this is literally someone who wants this card more than anything and does not care at all about just flushing money down the toilet. Because if they ever want to sell this card, I do not see this card ever going for 30K again. It doesn't make sense initially, and I can't make it make sense the second time around.
You can't rationalize with Black Label collectors. You can't. They once you go black, Zach, you don't go back. Apparently, with Black Label collectors.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so
it makes no sense.
It does make sense. It's absolutely insane. But anyways, just continuing that trend with Black Label cards, we have a Black Label set of Kanto lottery starters. So the entire set finished off at 37.2. This is, you got to own it because all these cards individually are pop 1 with the Black Label. Once again, Charizard usually finishes off at around 3,000. I think Venusaur, and I actually auctioned a couple as well recently. Venusaur, Blastoise around the Venusaur as just with with Watsy just at the bottom there, just chilling because it's a Venusaur. Blastoise around like the $500 mark. What you're really paying for is the Charizard in a black label, and once again, I'd still say I would wager that it would be better off just to have sold these individually, because you would probably have a much larger buyer pool, and you probably would have made more money if you would have auctioned off individually. But what are your thoughts?
It's the collector. The seller's a collector, and I'm pretty sure I know the seller pretty well, and they want these to stay together. It was really tough for them to get. I think they were very fortunate to get the grades they got. I think it might have all been one submission. I'm not positive, but I remember seeing it kind of I don't remember seeing the slow build up. And so, like, I agree. Like, even with me, when I buy like 2 or 3 things, it's like I wish they were in one lot to make it easy. But it does hurt the seller at the end of the day, because I do think they would have gone for more, like you said. That Charizard may have hit 20, 25. I mean, that multiple is far beyond the 4x multiple we talked about. And so the Venusaur Blastoise, like, there are some Venusaur only collectors that probably just love that artwork because it's a beautiful artwork. Same with Charizard and Blastoise. So I agree that I do think there's probably another 20% upside here if they would have been individual.
Yeah, I know, like, we as collectors, we like to romanticize like the aspect of collecting and trying, like, you built the set and you want to try to keep everything together just because it's kind of like it's a journey. It's kind of like a symbol of your journey along the way to get where you want to get or where you've gotten. But if you really want to maximize, like, giving you an example, those Battle Festa Pika and Mew set that I sold, they're actually, I don't know if I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but they're actually sequential certs. So they're right after the other. So they were graded by the same grader, sold to me at the exact same time. I did not buy them individually, and it looks cool to have sequential certs. It tells kind of a cool story, but at the same time, like I didn't sell them as a set together, and I feel like I did much better by selling them separately.
The only time you think about sequential certs is when you're buying or selling. Like, at no point do you ever like think about it like when you have the cards. And so every time, like, I get hit with but there's sequential certs, like, okay, well, I'll wait and buy them non-sequential. Like, I'm buying the card, not like the order they were submitted in, or and maybe I'll go get them recased and say, oh, I think these certs are stolen. Can you please give me new certs? Like, boom, 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 sequential. I'm just making this up here, but I'm not a big fan of the sequential cert premium, but I get any novel thing you can do to increase the price. It's like you got to go for it.
Do you know what the craziest thing, if you're talking like sequential certs, that I've ever seen in the entire hobby? I saw an entire set. It was a Canadian seller and collector. He sold. I can't remember if it was Neo Genesis or Neo Rev, but the non-holos, he had the entire set all sequential, like all. So he submitted them all at the same time. All got PSA 10s, and it was insane. I was like, that's really cool to submit all, like, an entire complete set and get PSA 10s in all of them, and just have them all in sequential search for the non-hauls. I don't know. I've never seen it before in the hobby.
I mean, that's pretty cool. It's like hitting a lottery ticket, but the lottery ticket doesn't pay anything. So
it's a good story. It's a good story.
Cool. It's like, yeah, that's awesome, man. I don't know. I get hit so many times with the random 8 and 9 here and there, and I'm like, but they're all 10s. It's like, but no, they're not. We can't give out that many 10s. So, yeah.
You're really down on PSA these days with a population control.
I don't know, man. I'm speaking from experience. I still love PSA. 95% of what I own is still PSA. So,
all right. Well, we'll revisit. Great. We'll revisit that for another day. We have a couple more sales to go through. So we have a set of Scramble cards, not sold as a set. I was heavily interested to see where these finished off, because in my drop off to PWCC at the Toronto Card Expo, I dropped off a complete Scramble set as well. So EEVEE'S, we all knew it. We all knew it was going to happen, but that EV premium is very real, because we had the EV finished off at 48K. The Krogan finished off at 9,300, and the Pachirisu finished off at 81. The Pachirisu is the lowest grade one with a population of 4, whereas the EV and the Krogunk have a pop of 5. I know where 3 of them are. I don't know where the other 2 are now. So it'll be very interesting to see if these sales cause some extra ones to resurface. I think that these cards long term would project better. I would not sell if you were to offer me like 50 grand right now for the EV. I would not take it just because I think long term. I think these cards are still very obscure right now. Not a lot of people know them about them, and as of right now, there were only 100 copies handed out. So I would probably plus whatever extra copies that were collected by Nintendo employees. And low pop, I probably would not let one go for less than 100K at this point. Interesting note on the Krogan though. I thought 9,300 was a really good price for that card because a couple months ago, I think it was last year or 2 years ago, a BGS 10 Krogan auctioned off at around like I think I'll post like a picture. I think it was below 9,300. So someone got a BGS 10 for a little bit less than that. So, but around 10,000, I still think it's a little bit low considering people are paying $5,000 for PSA 10 pop Mario Pikas at $5,000, which there are literally 1,000 of them on the market right now. Yeah, I wouldn't. If I was the owner of these cards with the Pachirisu and the Krogunk, I would probably be a little bit disappointed in those sales. Eevee, I'd say, I think there's still more room there.
What's the pop of the Eevee?
5.
Okay, that makes more sense because I was about to say like one. I think you're absolutely crazy for not taking 50K if someone offered you 50. Mostly because if you look at the snap cards, like how many exist of those?
That's true.
Like it's like they're still selling. What is it? One of the coughing sold for 30, and then I guess you could call that the Pachirisu or whatever. But then it's like the Articuno, and then this and that. So that 50 to 70 range is pretty stable for a lot of them, and then maybe you get the Charmander or this and that. They hop up to like 100 or so. So I guess I could see it a little bit, maybe the 100 case, but with there being 100 copies and I guess there's 510, so it's really the 10 premium is what you're counting on for that 100K piece. But I think a non PSA 10 Scramble Eevee would be maybe even lower than 50. So
yeah, like I everything you said, I completely agree with you, especially when if you directly contrast of like what snap cards are selling for. But and like I said, like these sales might flush out more now that they have more awareness to them, and 50K is still a lot of money. So maybe this will get more to pop up in the market, but until that pop skyrockets, I would just hold at that point.
Well, the next card up is, I don't think we talked about this yet, is the PSA 10 sample Pikachu. And man, do we have a story between us on that one.
So another card, I've full disclosure, I own 3 of these cards. So, I own 3 of them. I almost owned 4 at one point, but I do own 3 of them. But I actually dropped one off at the Toronto Card Show. This card is of all the sample cards. This card is by far the most expensive one. I actually had mine listed on PWCC fixed marketplace for 25K. With offers available while this auction was going on. So I think that possibly could have put the ceiling on how this card finished off at auction, because at auction it finished off at 24K. It's one of the most whimsical, beautiful artworks of a Pikachu in the entire hobby. But I'll let Zach take the floor of our history with this card.
Yeah, so I basically had a PSA 10 sample set, and I was missing one card. And come to find out, I was like, oh, Tetra's been the one buying these. That's why I haven't been able to get one at auction for, 3, 4, 5, K, however many it is. And, I helped Tetra, get his full set from, I well, you cut it out if you don't want me to say, but from Rusty for a good price, and they made that connection. So I was like, hey man, do you mind just like letting one of the Pikas go? Because I think you were bidding to win, and like your bid price was like as high as it needs to go, and I'm like, hey man, I'm gonna bid to win too. Like I would love to get one. Like I don't necessarily want to pay double the last like 2 sales that happened this month, but so Tetra very kindly. I think you gave a few bids just to be like, you're not getting a deal, but you can get it. And so I think I paid, I don't know, I paid really close like what they were going for, but it wasn't like a steal or anything. It's just if we would have bid against each other, it would have been bad.
I think the market at that point was 3K per card.
Yeah,
around 3,000
for the Pikas.
For the Pika, I bought I can't remember because Rusty had the entire set on his page. I think I paid $6,000, $6 or $7,000 for the entire sample set. So which was obviously good decision. Sample cards are a really cool story because they have an English front, but they're printed on Japanese cardstock. So the back of the card is actually a Japanese back, which is kind of it's strange. It's very weird. And the provenance of those cards right now are just Rusty's word and interpretation. So his Rusty story was that there were 100 of them, around 100 of them, given at the Pokemon Center in New York when the Pokemon Center in New York was a thing. This was the transition when WotC had lost the license, about to lose the license to Pokemon, and they were showcasing the e-reader section. The e-reader technology, basically, and these cards apparently were only supposed to be they were supposed to be used at the Pokemon Center in New York. And then obviously if you swipe them, you damage them because swiping causes damage. And then apparently like a bunch of them were just like picked up by Rusty, and he slowly trickled them out throughout the years. But I haven't checked the population on the cards yet. What was the lowest pop one? Was it the?
Oh man, was it Chansey or was it a Machop or?
I think it was a Machop. Well, I'll put a disclaimer, but it wasn't a Pika.
Yeah.
But in terms of desirability, I think obviously the Pika is at the top, but I also think in second place is the Pikachu because it's just that kind of vein of collector. Species collectors. You cannot
to the moon.
You cannot argue. But man, imagine if you were like, what's the worst species? A Pikachu, obviously, that's the answer. That would be the worst species collector in the entire hobby if you were a species collector.
Every time I go to a show, I'm like, hey, what do you collect? I'm like, don't say Charizard. If you say Charizard, I don't believe you like Pokemon. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, but yeah, to the moon. But yeah, 24K solid sale for that card, and it actually ended up bumping my buy it now price up to 35K because I was like, oh, that's a little too close to my buy it now price. So I'll tack on an extra 10K there. We'll see where it goes from here.
He does not want to sell the card. That's what he's telling you.
But yeah, a lot of good sales. We have a lot of the high end, and hopefully more high end keeps coming up because it's the most interesting to talk about. But let's just give me something different high end. No, give me a minimum PSA 9 illustrator, and then I'll get excited to talk about illustrators again.
So with that, we'll move on to the main topic of today's episode, which is we have a few main topics, but the one we'll get into first is going to be the high-end supply. We touched on a lot earlier with the market trends and such. And what's interesting with the high-end supply is there's a lot of different factors that come up. Like a lot of the high-end trophies seem to be coming up, but a lot of like the older like WotC, like vintage, especially English set cards, they still seem to be like settling, at a lower price. Like you saw that the first set base set, I'd attribute that mostly to someone auctioning a full set versus splitting it up. But you aren't seeing the Charizard like PSA 10 population jump up. It's still in the 120s. It's not like 130, 140, 150 or anything like that. And so you're seeing a lot of those copies, the ones being cycled. I think you have to think about like a market, and fear motivates people more than greed. And so I think there were like 7 or 8 like first set base Zards auctioned this year already. That's kind of a decent bit. I sold one last November for a buy it now price. Talked to the buyer privately. It was one of the best copies I had. So it ended up going a little bit higher. But I think as we continue to see things cycle in and out, I think there are a lot of people who maybe are fearful of like the end of the year, the economy. Just it is a presidential year in the United States, and there are a lot of like trends that suggest that maybe there's something going on later this year. So I think there's a lot of factors as why the high end supply seems to one just be hitting the market, but two seems to be trending downward on price. But I think what the point here is that it could be a really good opportunity to buy. And so I think some of the greatest investors over time have always said, when everyone's buying, that might be the time to sell. And so I know we'll talk about EVs here in a little bit, but one of the points is, the Moonbryon was $700, last December. It's $1,500, $1,600 now today. It may be the best time to sell that card today versus, when you look at the Charizard, it's holding pretty firm at like 170. I think there's some sales that'll go a little higher. The Illustrator seems to be holding pretty firm at 200. Even some of the trophies are holding, at that above, 60K to, low like 100K price point for some of the off trophies. And so I think it may actually be a good time to buy some of these things when the market is appearing to me to be a little bit more fearful.
The PSA 10 population. You have to like realize like the PSA 10 population of Charizards. Like you have to think of the amount of people that have regraded that card, and just like for that grade optimization, and just like you want to talk about like population control. Like that card is the prime example of population control, because I remember when I first entered the market at like 2016, I think. The population of like Zard was like low 100s. Fast forward to 2024, where last time I checked was like 124. Like an extra like 20 copies over nearly like 8-year span. That's like, and the amount of like people who have been submitting and regrading, cracking cases and grading, that's not a huge spike in like the population. So feeling with like picking up on your like undertones from our last segment of like grade optimization and population control, it's just a bunch of like with the amount of Charizards that have come out last year, it's literally just people exchanging. There's like the same ones are being cycled through back and forth, and it's understandable that like have a lot of factors as well. Like I think like obviously we would have all liked to sell at like that, to be that $400,000 sale, getting the peak value for your money of what you invested into. But at the same time, like 174,000, that's still that's a lot of cake, man. That's still like, even if like let's just say you bought in like 30-40K when I just started really getting into the hobby, that is still a substantial return on investment. And people, it honestly could just come down to like, people could sum it up, I can buy a new Porsche with this car. Like I know some people are just like gearheads, and this car will let me buy my dream car. And they also forget to take into account that you probably have to pay taxes on those on your sale as well, and then they kind of get stuck. But at the same time, it's still like $170,000 to most people is a lot of money, especially if you got in early. So, which is why we see a lot of the exchanges. But as always, if you want maximum value for the card and your investments, then you just have to wait it out. And you have to kind of like wait out and ride out this wave of just more all these Charizards coming to auction all at once. Same thing with these illustrators, man. There's just illustrator fatigue is the same thing as Charizard fatigue at this point. Yeah, like if you have an illustrator and you're still looking to sell, now it's just like bad time to do it. You just got to hold out.
Yeah, I think you made some good points there about just the price kind of shooting up over time, and they don't all cycle. And I kind of want to piggyback on that. Like, let's think about how many like Charizards have sold over 50K. Just throw that number out there, and let's say that it's been 30-ish or so over the last like maybe 3 or 4 years. Maybe it's a little more, but of those 30, maybe a couple of them are the same card. I know I've seen at least one or two take like some pretty heavy losses. I know a couple of them have been crossed over between grading companies. Logan crossed the PSA 10 to BGS 10. I know one of the SGC 10, Black Diamonds was crossed to CGC Pristine. The other CGC Pristine was a raw card. And so there's a lot of like moving parts here and there. But of the 124 copies, I've had a decent bit in my collection that I think I've only really let one go above 50K. And then there's a lot of other people that have had some, like Gary still has quite a few copies. they haven't all necessarily sold for that 170. And so what the market does is, like let's say a stock were to just shoot up over time. And there's a lot of people that just aren't looking at it every day or every month or every year. And eventually they look and say, oh man, this thing doubled. Like I got to cash out like this, that. And so there's a lot of people that still have those Zards that they probably paid less than 10K for. And, they're okay at 170 not selling, but maybe there's a lot of people that haven't seen it that are happy to sell at 100. And so you have to let the market kind of just breathe a little bit. You have to let those sales come up. Then we have that sort of pause, that 170 mark that we're seeing. I think you're really priming yourself for, unless the floor breaks and it comes down, but you're priming yourself for something to happen. Like it's just not going to stay at 170 forever. And I don't know. There's so many factors in markets and stuff. I know there's still a lot of economics people that are out there that are crushing it in Pokemon. I want to say that they know who they are, but it just, when you look at the hobby, you look at how everything relates. I think we used to say Charizard's like the bread and butter. It's like the life of the hobby, and everything else kind of ties back into it. As far as like if the Zard's this price and the Blastoise is here, or you could even go as far as say the Poncho Pikachu should be here because the first dead base Zard's there. Maybe that's a bit of a stretch, but it's like everything kind of relates in some way, and it just really feels like a lot of the high end like English, especially first edition, is just there's so much room, there's so much value there for it to grow. I don't see it coming down too much further, and maybe this is a story we'll continue to say the rest of the year.
Mm-hmm. So we talk about high end supply. Lots of illustrators, lots of Charizards, couple of Trophy Pikas. What are we not seeing? The first thing that comes to mind is we had a little bit of a run there of Trophy Kangs. We saw a lot of Trophy Kangs, but we haven't seen one in a while. And we haven't seen any of the SSBs in a long time either. The ones with the Mewtwo holographic background. But what else are we not seeing?
I mean, what's a card that was extremely hyped, a couple of years ago that, Pokemon Syndicate was all about for the longest time, that we saw some pretty crazy sales on? It'd be the no rarity 10. Yeah, the no rarity hollows. And so like I think maybe one or two pop up here and there from random Japanese shops. But you really haven't seen the pop on those grow. You haven't really seen any public sales of a lot of the cards. A lot of them are still like sub pop 1, 2. And many people consider this to be like the predecessor to the Japanese base set. I don't think it's confirmed, but it's widely accepted. I think that the no rarity was probably before the main release. I think the last Zard sale was like 250K. I think there may have been one with the case. There was auto in the case that got, maybe that was like more like a year ago. But there really haven't that many sales of it. And so like there are some things still in the shadows that are still kind of doing their thing. And like if a no rarity chance you were to pop up for auction, I can see that card going for like 50K plus or maybe even higher because one, there's some serious Chansey collectors. Two, it's never really been available. And three, like you're going to call it the first Chansey. I get there's the whole Bandai card ass, like this argument. My argument to them is trading card game. It's a game to be played. There's attack, defense, this and that. Like, I don't know. I'm a big believer that base set is the first game. So apologies.
So my opinion on no rarity has drastically changed with the emergence of the Chinese buyers.
I see.
So prior to the Chinese buyers entering the market, I didn't think like, yeah, it's cool, but I just think that the English is just so well known. The buyer pool is just so much bigger because people prefer to have English cards. But now, after the influx of the Chinese buyers, maybe some filtering of monies in nefarious ways of trying to just direct funds elsewhere. I think because Japanese people, they don't. Chinese people generally don't like. They'll buy English cards, but they prefer to buy Japanese cards just because that's what they prefer. Rest in peace, all the other languages as well. But there's a higher premium for Chinese buyers on Japanese cards. So like you said, I could see if a Chansey ever popped up, someone could just blow their brains out, honestly, at some point. Just like, this is the first one, no guarantees another one's coming out. Maybe they want to have like the clout to be, maybe they're chasing like the very first ever complete hollow no rarity set out there and just have copious amounts of money. But like, yeah, like I was very bearish on no rarity, but with like the influx of Japanese buyers coming to the market, I could see like people just like blowing their brains out, like the 16 hollows for first edition.
It'd be wild. I mean, a PSA 10 set does not exist as far as I know. So
yeah, it's the race to first, man. It's the race to first.
There are people that are close, but we'll see.
We'll see. All right, so we'll move on to the title of this podcast, EV to the Moon, which really centers around like the the spike in evolving skies, alt art EVs, just like species collecting and just like how important it is to recognize species play a dramatic part of this hobby. There are people who only collect a certain amount of species. I say to anyone who is entering the hobby trying to invest in the hobby, you should absolutely consider species popularity when you consider filling out your collection. Your Eevees, your Pikachus, your Charizards, all your evolutions are all safe bets. Those Chanseys as well, which is kind of strange, but Chanseys, Pichu collectors. When did Evolving Skies come out? Like,
oh man, was it 2021 or maybe was it before COVID? I was gonna double check that. But whenever it came out, it was just it took off like crazy. I mean, people just absolutely loved. I think it was 2021. People just absolutely love that set. There's so many EVs that are baked in there. But really, I think that the bigger story is the Scarlet and Violet takeoff. Like, there's so many other alt arts that are huge. I think we focus on the EVs because there's so many more EV collectors and fans. But there's the alt art Ray that's in there that's beautiful, like the Skytree Ray. And there's so many other just beautiful alt arts that we're seeing a lot of buyouts on these. And so if you hop on a TCG player and you look at cards and then you see the price, and boom, price, boom. It's kind of nuts. And I think we've always said, modern is a different market than vintage. You can't like blend the two. Vintage is going to operate on its own, and it's a little down right now, and it's still holding firm compared to other TCGs that are out there. But modern is just like in this just full send, just to the moon thing. And the part that blows me away about modern is like a lot of stuff is still being printed. Some of the stuff is still in rotation, not all of it. And then Pokemon has come back and reprinted sets before. I get that distributors and a lot of stores have more info than maybe we have. I hear a lot of that stuff secondhand, but like they've proven that they'll reprint things, like time and time again. So like I think we're at this point that even if Pokemon were to take everything they printed for Scarlet and Violet and they were to like print it again, like just double it, I think everyone is under the assumption that like the market can consume it and take it and absorb it and really just run with it, because there's no fear of like the quantity, the volume. I mean, think about the amount of Moonbreon PSA 10s that are out there. Like, it's absurd. And for that card to be priced at, 15, 16, 1700 bucks, it really like the question I always like to tell people is, do you see the Moonbreon going to 5K, to 4K, to 3K? Or do you really feel like 2K long-term is peak value? Because I'm not saying that for the history of this card, it'll always be at 2K or higher, or whatever. Like, I do think that the cards, like the economy of the hobby, does have highs and lows. It does go up and down. Will there be a reality where a Moonbreon is under $1,000 again in the future? I think it's a very high likelihood. I think at some point in the next 2 years, we'll probably see Moonbreon below 1K. And so I'm not saying, FOMO is probably one of the biggest ways to lose money in this hobby. It's probably also one of the biggest ways to, pay stupid tax. If everyone is buying the Moonbreon, it might be a good time to sell it. And if it's a card you really want, like, just be patient. Wait for the hobby to take a little dip. The hobby will always have highs and lows. It will never be perfectly linear.
Yeah. Like, if you bought into like this Evolving Skies, like at the beginning, like obviously anything sealed, you will never lose money in most cases with like sealed product long term. But the ceiling on the high, like your Moonbreons, it's very low, which is kind of the case with like most modern. The ceiling on most modern is fairly low. And if you kind of want like a prime example of a card, you can take a look at the hyper rare Charizard from Burning Skies. Where the prices of that card was when it was 4 years ago to where it is now. Really not that much movement in terms of where a lot of if you were to take actual knowledge of the hobby and understanding of what's rare, what's not rare, taking into account all other factors, you could invest your money invest your money better in other facets of the hobby if you have patience to kind of learn about all the other stuff as well. Also, when we talk about sealed, like another thing that people don't take into account when they're talking about sealed is that you have to buy a lot of it to like to come out like wow long term. And where are you gonna keep all of it? Just like
Takes a lot of space, man.
it takes a lot of space. It's the same thing to like what Lego collectors have to deal with. Like Lego collectors and people who like hoard Lego, you gotta put that Lego somewhere. It just can't be floor to ceiling in your house out in the open. You have to like pay for storage. It's just it's a lot of space. But there are people who do it. There are like people. There are people who literally and when a set comes out, they'll buy like 2 or 3 full pallets of that and just like sit on it for like a decade. There are people who are sitting on pallets of jungle right now. It's just like long term, you will do well on sealed, especially if you hit like a winner. Let's just say you evolved heavily into Lost Thunder or you invested heavily into Evolving Skies. Obviously, I think now would probably be a good time if you can think of other facets to kind of reinvest in. Obviously, if you don't have any, if there's nothing else you want to rotate capital in purchase, then maybe just hang on to it. It's an easier way to look at it. But at that point, I don't find that fun. To me personally, that's not enjoyable. It's work. It's work. You're not like fully enjoying the hobby of buying what you want. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. If you want to store a pallet, you could probably get that down like maybe $5 a pallet. If you went to the right place, you'd have like an in and out cost if you like want to do that. But like there are ways to do this like pretty cheap and efficient. But at the same time, like there's always gonna be people bigger than you that are doing this. There are always gonna be people who are buying multiple pallets that already own the warehouse and the land that bought it 20 years ago. That like it's really hard to compete with some of the competitive advantages out there. I'm not saying don't go buy your set, but like there may be better investments that just have better movements, this and that. If like there's a card I like, a lot of times I'll buy like one copy of that card, like the Magic card, the Kamiya art. Like that's one of the cards going to the moon. It's like $600. The Haunter, the Ghastly, and maybe the Drowsy is going to be next for some of that Kamiya art. I might go buy one copy for like it if it's a card I love. Maybe I get a few of them, this and that. But a lot of the Moonbreon collectors that I'm seeing, like they have like 5, 10, 20 copies. Like you're not buying that card because you like it. You're buying the card because you're investing in it. Like you are like saying, I am riding this wave. We're going to go to however far. And like, it just, it's, if you're collecting and you love the hobby and you just want to buy what you like, we've said time and time again, like if you buy what you like, you'll probably do well over time with no regard to the investment side of it, because there's probably other people that think similar to you. And what happens when a lot of people think the same way? Demand goes up, prices go up. But like when you kind of full send and you get like 100 base hit Zards, it's like you are now taking a very calculated approach that you think like where the base hit Zard is today, I think it'll go up. Not saying it's not valuable, because again it costs a lot of money today, but you're saying I think it'll improve from where it's at. So I cannot rationalize the Moonbreon. If I had 20 Moonbrowns and someone said 1,500 for all, I'd say deal, here you go. Next item, like
especially since it's like it's still in print right now. Like if you one thing that you can always bank on in life is death taxes and Pokemon reprinting sets. It's just happened with Roaring Skies. It'll happen again. It happened with Mango Pikas. It's just like if a set gets too hot, you can almost guarantee that a reprint is going to happen again, which long term could obviously impact your investment strategies.
Another big topic that came up was 151. The booster box is coming out. People are cracking these left and right for $200 a box. I mean, hop on Whatnot all day. People are paying $7 plus a pack. And it's a fun set, even when you're paying that premium. It's fun. You chase the Master Ball. There's so many hits. I think I opened a box in Japan and paid maybe like 160 or so, like back in Worlds, and I got like $50 for the hits. It was awesome, and the alt arts are beautiful, this and that. But lo and behold, Japan reprinted them. They said, hey, we want these to be accessible. We don't like the fact that stores can only give 5 packs to kids and no one else can get it. So you can go to the Pokemon Center and you can get it. They'll take the shrink wrap off to where it's not wrapped, and you still have to do the pull tab to open it, because if you're buying a box, they want you to open it. But it's one of those things where the price literally went from the 180 at shows, 200 at online, all the way down to really you can get this for like 50 to 55 bucks a box if you're looking at the right place. Now the sealed ones go for a little bit more. When we say sealed, we mean shrink wrap with the plastic wrap. If you do buy it for the Pokemon Center, they will cut that off, so that's considered the no wrap. These come in cases of 12, and then a master case has 4 of them. And there are people out there that I've seen some people flex on Instagram that have 100K plus positions in the 151 reprint as soon as it came out. It's literally nuts. But I think if you're going to make a bet on a set, like, this would be a very easy thing to do. I think when streamers can sell something pretty easy for 4x the current price, I see this going above 100 before in the next few months. And I think by end of year, this year it'll be 150 plus. It's an awesome set to open.
What if you can't beat Kanto, man? You really can't beat the nostalgia Kanto. It's just everyone knows there's just so many weird Pokemon out now. I can't keep up with modern day Pokemon, man. It's just like, yeah, stuff like that. Like there's like that sand trap one that looks like a sandcastle. I can't. Maybe it's like this is my old man yelling at cloud segment. I can't keep up right now. It's just too much. So that wraps up the main topics. Let's move into our show and tell of Collector's Corner. So my first card for Collector's Corner, or my only card, is one that I found because I lost it for the longest time. Cause I was talking about last week how Suicune art just always hits, and this one I knew I had 2 copies of, but I could only find one at the time. This is the 2010 LP L-P promo Suicune lottery card. So officially 1,000 of these were handed out. You actually had to enter lottery to win them. Same in line, basically, just less available as the Kanto starters. I think there were like 10,000 Kanto starters that were handed out, whereas with the Mythical Beasts, there was only 1,000 of them handed out. The reason I bring this up is because I actually have plans for this card with the extra copy that I have. I think the last PSA 10 copy of this card sold in like 2022 for 7,500-ish. So given that time, haven't seen one popped up in a while. I expect a little bit bump of that, but I plan to sell one of them and pick up first edition Near Revelation Suicune just to bump up my because currently I have a 9 in that card. So I intend to try to basically exchange in terms of value one of these cards for a PSA 10 Near Revelation copy. That's the purest form of the hobby right there. Just trying to selling stuff so you can reinvest and buy some other things. So that is my card of the week this week.
That you're doing a trade up challenge here, guys. Please help. Please help.
Shake my hand. Shake my hand. Shake it in my hand.
Welcome. Oh my gosh. Well, I hope you get your Neo Rev Suicune. Beautiful card.
Yeah.
A card that's fluctuated price so much. It's kind of nuts. But I think now is like a better time than ever to get something like that. It just so much demand for it years ago. For people who would absolutely get that card at some point, it's just kind of like, if you can get it for the price you mentioned, I think that'd be great.
I think it sits around like 8 to 10 grand currently for that card. The new Rev one, anyways. So if I have to pay it, like, let's just say I get the same auction price of 800 or 8,000 for this card. If I have to pay an extra 2,000, that's fine. But yeah, it's kind of why I have 2 of the same card when I can knock off one of the goals from another set, right?
Yeah, be careful what you offer, because I think it might have been down to 7,500 recently for the first ed, and there may have been some auctions even lower than that. So you may have some cash left over. If
we'll see. We'll see. I try to be optimistic, Zach. I don't try to overvalue things.
Oh man, you pay more. I want to pay more. I'm just kidding.
All right. What do you got for me?
I'll hop into the card of the week. Got a story with this one. So this is a card that PSA would not grade for the longest time due to a printing error on the front of the card. And then the card condition is nearly immaculate. It's a beautiful, beautiful card. And it's one of those stories of a card that doesn't reach the top grade, simply because one of the areas is slightly not quite where it needs to be, but the card's beautiful otherwise. And this is none other than the No Rarity Raichu. And so this card is a CGC 9. The subgrades are 8-5, 9-5, 10, and 10. Beautiful, beautiful subgrades. And it is one of the cleanest No Rarity Raichus I've ever seen. The centering is just slightly off top to bottom. And it's just like, I really thought it could be a 9, and I think I tried to cross at PSA. They're like, we don't give anything CDC upgrades, and
okay, we gotta stop bashing PSA.
I'm sorry, it's a CDC 9, but the subgrades are just like stunning. Yeah. And the reason that PSA wouldn't grade it is because the Pokedex number down here is 25, and that's not Raichu. That's actually Pikachu. So
that was a fake card.
Yeah, they're like, hey, prove it was released, and there's all this digging, this and that, and there's like every example of this card is this, and it's like it took years to get to a point where PSA would grade it, and so I actually graded this with CGC Raw. I bought it from I think Buyee or something, or a Yahoo auction, something like a long time ago, and it graded really well, like literally one of the cleanest Raichus. But it's one of those cases where sometimes you get a 10 or you get that top grade, everything can be perfect, and you still just barely miss it. So I'm forever going to keep the card in this case because how clean it is.
So you imported that card yourself?
Oh yeah, just
yeah. With a little help from Hamada. This card, I think I got this card from like Andrew. From
nice.
When he was Secret? What was his name before Card Secret? Man, someone leave the comment. What was Card Auction? What was Card Secret before it was Card Secret?
I bought a ton of like Japanese set cards from him. He was auctioning like Web Unlimited first edition, and like I was picking this up 30, 50, $60 a card. Like, but he was the only guy that could source them and like grade them, and
because he lives in Japan. Because he lives in Japan.
Well, he lived in Australia at the time for a little bit, but he moved to Japan. I think he was like one of the first card shops open in Japan by like a non-Japanese like person.
I'm sure that went over so well for him.
He went through quite a bit to get there, and he's got a great store now, and he's got a lot of people going through. I think I saw like Mystic 7 and a couple other people like stop by his shop. So it's like this. Yeah, everyone just wants to go see him in Ikebukuro, which is kind of cool.
Japan International Trade.
Oh, there you go. That's it.
Yeah,
that's it.
Japan International Trade. That was it. All right. So, final section of the podcast. Ask Nick and Zach viewer questions. Your viewer questions that we pull straight from YouTube. You can also leave them on Instagram as well, on our Instagram page. So, first question comes from Hanger Williams, who has invested into some Poncho Pikas due to the backlog of PSA. He sent them to CGC. He's got 9s and 9.5 subgrades. And does he recommend cracking and regrading to PSA to get that PSA premium? It really depends on what the subgrades are, as well as your familiarity of being able to pre-screen a card. Obviously, there is a large premium from a PSA 10 to a PSA 9, but there's a lot of risk as well. You can damage cards by cracking them if you don't know what you're doing. It really I honestly think it really comes down to your experience in the hobby. If you're not that experienced in the hobby, I would probably vote against it. But what does Zach have to say?
I'd say 100% crack them, send them in PSA.
Just complete opposite.
The early CGC grades when PSA was closed or when the grading scale was different, and they're tough. So a lot of these grades are probably like tough grades. So the CGC 995, there's a lot of people that have actually bought those earlier grades and crossed them and got PSA 10s. If, like Tetra said, if you're not comfortable with cracking, have someone else crack them for you. Cracking is not hard, but you do need to practice a little bit, and I don't know if I would practice on a Poncho. You literally go to a card show, there's going to be 100 people there that can crack it for you. If I see you at a show, I'll crack it for you for free. Just bring it to me. I'll just do it real fast. Swolpo can actually crack cards with just his hands. That's
because he's swole. Because he's so swole, right?
I didn't get it, but thanks. I'm so sorry.
But at the same time, like, yes, CGC grading standards were really tough back then, but also PSA grading standards have also increased as time has, like, that's why people more highly value more newer certs, especially when we talk about some of the more older valuable cards. But at this time, at this point, I feel like there's just the PSA 10 population on Pancho Picas is so high at this point. Like, I almost feel like they're almost like auto 10s at this point. If you consider if they go through PSA, I don't know. There won't be there's no pop control on 1,000 pop PSA 10 card. You know what I mean?
So next question, Cardboard Kingdom. If you had to give away all your cards and can only keep one in your collection, regardless of value, what would it be, Tetra?
Illustrator.
Do you have an Illustrator?
No.
Dude. It's like, what a reveal, man.
No.
This thing.
No. It's a terrible answer, but it would be my first answer art. Honestly, okay. I know it's such a vanilla answer, and people can like roll their eyes. I can just visually see people rolling their eyes at this point. But it's the card, man. It's the card that I had growing up. It's the card that I always wanted. It's the card that really got me interested in the hobby and jumped into it. It was literally the reason why I jumped into the hobby. I was like, couldn't afford Pokemon cards growing up. Didn't own any Pokemon cards growing up. First card I ever purchased was, I can't remember what order it was. It was like a PSA 10 Venusaur or Blastoise. Literally the first cards that I bought, and the goal long term was to get a Charizard eventually to complete the trifecta. Lo and behold, just things evolved, got into other things, got the majority of English done that I wanted, dabbled in Japanese, Boston High and Japanese cards, and it's just like a journey. It's a journey, and that kind of card like symbolizes the beginning of that journey and kind of like my childhood all at the same time. So it's a vanilla answer, but the first edition Charizard probably.
You did a really good job of explaining it, this and that. I'll give you props. So I was going to roast you on drawing a line through that, regardless of value piece that was there. But no, that's a really good answer. It's such a tough question, and I've thought about a lot of cards. Like there's some auto cards I really treasure. There's cards I've gotten signed by friends I really treasure. Most valuable card is probably still the first Ed base Zard. I don't own any of the super high-end Japanese trophies. I love Jolteon, Jungle Jolteon, just the art, this and that. I feel like there's so many people that just I'm like synonymous with that card almost. So if I had to take all those factors and narrow it down to one card, I'd probably say the no symbol Jungle Jolteon. I got signed by Jimeno when I was at Charlotte for the regionals. She signed it with the EV inscription on it. She did her name, and then I asked her very kindly to draw in the jungle symbol where it was missing. And so it was kind of one of those perfect moments where I remember being confused as a kid and not really sure kind of if it was base or jungle and trying to figure it out. And I didn't realize no symbol jungle was a thing until I was much, much older. And so it's kind of like the artist kind of like helping the child. And I just really love that sort of like connection. And it just full sloop from childhood back to collector. I've got many cards that are way more valuable, many cards that other people would probably want, but to me it's like if you take collecting journey, history, this, that, like it's all in one card, like I could look at that card every day.
Zach took the cop-out answer because officially he's not allowed selling that card anyways, so
I can sell that card. I got it way before any current contractual obligations.
Okay. All right. Last question comes from TCV Collectibles. I kind of condensed this question because it was kind of long. But basically what he's asking is, with the prices of PSA 10, especially WotC, continuing to increase, where could you see 8s and 7s and lower grades go as potential everyday collector's items? And kind of like a follow-up question as well he had is, what is the cutoff grade for PSA where you buy a PSA card or where you might as well just buy a raw card? So I'm gonna let you dabble with this question and start off because I'm not familiar with the around that 7 area of raw versus graded. So I'll let you take the floor with this one.
Yeah, I mean, if you're buying raw to grade to get tens, you're going to lose money. Like it's absolutely cheaper to buy the 10 and run with it. It used to be like you could buy raw mint copies between 7 and 8 prices, or between 8 and 9 prices, and things have optimized so much with the way people look at things, the way people critique things, that you have 100 buyers that are looking at every auction, every listing to see if there's grading potential, to see what's hidden. You have all these dealer lots that are like carefully structured lots that are just designed to bait and switch you to get you to buy this and that. You have people who are great at taking photos and they know what's wrong with the card, but they still hide it. I've experienced that this year, with a couple cards where it's not disclosed, but clearly it should have been disclosed, even for higher value cards. So I think that a lot of the copies that are raw that are grade PSA 10s are probably selling above PSA 9 prices. Like I truly think they're going above. I've even seen some raw cards go for their PSA 10 price. It doesn't make sense. But the real kind of secret here is you can probably buy PSA 4 and 5 copies of cards that look good on in the case, crack them out, and you can sell them raw for probably PSA 8 and 9 prices. It sounds crazy, but there's so many people that aren't in the grading game. They don't really care about grading. They think the grading companies win with their fees. They'd rather look at cards in a binder. They'd rather play the decks, the old school decks. It just it's very, very difficult if you're going to buy raw and go to grade. Now, it can be done, but you're doing it in a way that not 1,000 of people have access to that collection. You're doing it in a way where you found this local friend or this, that, you go look at it, you make them a fair offer, they do the deal. But I mean, there's so many deals I see that if 100 other people in the hobby had access to it, that price in that deal would be so much higher. So,
what about the potential growth between PSA 8 and 9 in terms of its ceiling, since a lot of people have been priced out at PSA 10 at this point?
PSA 10 will always have. So I always like to explain this as it'll always have a greater second derivative, which means the acceleration of the 10s will always be like faster than the 9s. Now, if the prices retract or they come down, the PSA 10s will drop further than the 9s as far as a proportion or like a percentage of the card value. So, like if a 9 is $50 and a 10 is $200, that 10 is probably more likely to go to $1,000, 5x, versus the 9 5xing to 250. That 9 will probably get to 150 or something and kind of hold. So by buying the 10s of the top copy, you really get this pool of buyers that like they want the best of the best. They don't care about the price. They don't care about the metrics. They just want the best. They'll pay whatever it takes. So you get a greater acceleration the higher the grade, and you basically take less risk at the lower the grade. Now, like I said, when the market turns down and it comes down, you're going to lose more money in the high grade. You're going to lose less money in the lower grade. So I think buying an 8, 9, or 10 comes down to one, your risk tolerance, and two, your ability to afford it. Most people buy 8, 9s, and 10 based on their ability to afford it. They don't really factor in risk tolerance. So that's kind of my general opinion.
Final opinion is buy EVs. Just buy all just buy all the EVs. And with that solid advice, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the end of Next Gen TCG podcast for this week. 2 weeks in a row. Two shows in a row on time. Let's go.
Yeah.
We did it. We did it. So liking this regular scheduled broadcast, and we look forward to bringing you more episodes on a bi-weekly basis. Zach will be traveling, but he has lots of stuff that you can bring with him to record. Make sure that we can record regular content for you guys. Good show this week, Zach. Good luck with all your traveling, and say goodbye to everyone for us.
See you guys. I'm super stoked. Go to Card Party. It's going to be fun. We'll get Tetra there someday.
And buy all the EVs.
Oh, yeah.
Bye-bye.